Hey there pen fans, Brian Goulet of GouletPens.com here, and in this video I'm going to be introducing Sailor's new introductory pen, the Sailor TUZU Adjust. Or as it'll probably be known shorthand, and how I'll use it today, I'll just call it the TUZU. Now, my goal is to show you just what makes the TUZU so special, not only for Sailor, but for the whole pen community. I'll give you a detailed look at the pens and their color and nib options, show you how they write, and show you the rotating nib feature, as well as other unique aspects that make this a pen worth knowing. Now, this pen is new to Sailor's lineup for 2024, and they've designed it from the ground up with entirely new nibs, a new design, and new branding and colors. Sailor's renowned for models like the 1911 and Pro Gear, with the vast majority of their pens having gold nibs. They're also known for specialty nibs and Urushi Maki, but those are all pretty much for people that are already really serious about fountain pens and really into them. Sailor has really been missing an introductory pen in their lineup. The only ones kind of filling that void to this point have been the Sailor High Ace Neo, which is fine on its own, but it's really not that closely related to any other Sailor pen. Or maybe the Sailor Compass 1911, which has some moderate success in recent years, but has only been offered with a medium fine nib, and also deviates a bit from Sailor's established lineup. The TUZU Adjust is a pen that they've been developing for several years now, specifically to be their featured introductory pen, and the intentionality really shows. They've clearly invested a lot into it, and I think the thoughtfulness will come across as I show you more of the details. Now, the name TUZU is sort of an informal greeting in Japan, which kind of fits the vibe of the pen, so I think that's kind of cool. Now, there are 5 colors available on the TUZU at launch here, and these are all made from polycarbonate, which is a really durable material and is particularly impact resistant. You don't see actually that many fountain pens made of this material. There are 3 regular colors, black, gray, and mint, that we should see ongoing. At the pen's release here in the spring of 2024, there are 2 seasonal colors, a red and a translucent navy. While I don't have a super firm timeline for how long these seasonal colors will be available, I've been given an approximation of maybe around 6 months or so. So keep that in mind if you're interested in trying to decide on a color. They're planning to release more seasonal colors, but with a new pen like this, it's not certain how many or how often they'll be doing them. But I think it's kind of exciting to think that we'll get to see a pen like this in some more colors. Now let's talk about the overall design and how it feels in my hand. The TUZU Adjust has a clean, modern look to it. There's minimal branding, just a small Sailor logo written on the back of the cap near the opening, and an anchor logo on the nib, and that's it. It has a crisp, flat top and bottom. You can even stand the pen upright on your desk if you want. Of course, it's not super stable that way, but can't do that with many pens. There's a small ring indent on each end, mostly for design purposes, and the body is ever so slightly larger in the middle than it is at the ends, so it's got a very subtle taper going from the middle to each end of the pen. Looks pretty nice. And the clip is a tension clip with a really strong grip to it. It has a sort of a rubbery texture to it, so I think it'll be very sturdy and it'll basically clip anywhere that you want to clip it. The cap snaps on and off, very crisp and positively so. And Sailor's also designed a slide type cap insert to keep the nib from drying out, so that is a big plus. The grip is a slightly darker matte texture, and it matches the clip, and it complements the body color. I'll describe the grip in more detail here in a minute because there's a bit more to explain with it, but overall this is a very clean looking pen, and it feels very high quality. Now, the overall weight of the TUZU is 20 grams, which is relatively light, but not so much so that it feels too light. So it does mess a little bit with my American sensibility that weight equals quality. At the risk of generalizing, I'll say that the Japanese sentiment is that lighter products with higher precision, less waste, and more minimalist attributes tend to denote higher quality. So with that in mind, I would say this definitely conveys high quality. Now, the overall balance and feel in my hand is great. There's a bit of a step down from the body to the grip, but it's far enough back that my fingers don't touch it while I'm writing. And the cap also posts, and it posts pretty securely. It doesn't have a lot of back weight to the pen, much at all when you post it because the cap is so light. So it's comfortable posted or unposted. I will say that because the edges are a little bit crisp on this pen, if you happen to hold the pen really far back and maybe your thumb or something ends up touching that step, it may be more noticeable to you. I don't think it'll bother that many people though, honestly. And the only thing that might bug you is if you're posting the pen and the cap happens to rest in the crook of your thumb. That might be bothersome because the edge of the cap is pretty crisp as well. I have pretty big hands and I notice it a little bit, but it's not really bothering me that much. So I don't know. It's also long enough of a body that I actually like writing with it unposted, so I just don't post it. Now the grip has a matte texture to it, which gives it a little bit better grab than if it was just the shiny finish like you have on the body of the pen. I really like that matte finish because it's more secure to hold the grip. Now there are 2 indentations on this grip that give it kind of a triangular feel like you may see on some pens. Now this type of grip can sometimes be a little polarizing, especially if the indentations are really deep. Think about like the Lamy Safari, the TWSBI Eco T, Diplomat Magnum, and maybe the Kaweco Perkeo. Now these are all affordable pens with triangular grips. Now the Lamy Safari is probably the strongest example here, as it's maybe the most drastic triangular grip on a popular modern fountain pen. Now the reason grips like this can be beneficial is because it helps the writer keep the nib in the proper orientation, especially if you're newer to fountain pens. I think the reason it's so polarizing generally is because it can either make the grip feel a little bit smaller, or it can feel kind of uncomfortable if you aren't prone to holding your pen exactly in that sort of 3-fingered grip that the pen really wants you to have. Now that's where the TUZU Adjust can really stand out. It does have that triangular grip for stability, but it has a truly unique feature where you can actually rotate the grip and lock it in at 10-degree intervals. So you can essentially micro adjust the grip orientation to account for your personal hand grip style. Now, if you tend to rotate the pen in your hand to left or right, you can adjust for that. If you write a bit hook-handed, you can also adjust for that too. If you're a lefty who's needed to adapt your grip to fit in a right-handed world, well, you can adjust this grip to match your personal writing position as well. Now, talking with my darling wife, who has this 4-fingered grip that I'll never fully understand, even she was able to rotate the grip to accommodate her 4-fingered grip. She even experimented with rotating it completely around and having the flat parts on the bottom so that it rests on her middle and ring fingers. So you can just experiment all kinds of ways. The bottom line is you can play around with adjusting this grip so that the pen is most comfortable in your hand while the nib always stays in the ideal position for writing. Now to change the grip position, it's pretty simple, but I think showing it will help. And you can do this honestly even if the pen is inked up. So with the front section of the pen in your hand, unscrew the silver holding ring so that it's close to the edge of the grip threads, but you don't have to unscrew it all the way to remove it. You can just leave it on there. Then you just slide the grip away from the nib, and you can rotate that grip to the left or to the right in whatever position you want. To lock it back in place, you just slide it towards the nib, it sets it in place, and then you screw that holding ring back down to lock it in. Then you just reassemble the pen like you would and use it like you would any other pen. If you need to adjust the grip further, you just repeat that process until it feels good to you. Now a little hint here, if you want to set that grip back to be perfectly in line with the nib as it comes in kind of its default position, there's a small injection molding line that you can sort of see in the right light, and that will help to align it directly with the nib. If you look at the detent line that's on that grip section there, you just line that up, and then the triangle will be perfectly in line with the nib. The TUZU has the standard Sailor-made proprietary cartridge converter filling mechanism, but it does come with a converter, which definitely isn't a given for other pens in this price range. So that's actually a huge plus, and definitely needs to be taken into account if you're comparing this pen to others, since that Sailor converter normally alone costs $12. The TUZU nib is made of stainless steel, and it's newly designed by Sailor from the ground up. It's a sort of wraparound style winged nib, similar to what you might see from something, steel nibs from Lamy or Platinum. Now, they're each made by separate companies, so they're not compatible with each other, but it just gives you a sense of the overall kind of way that they work. The TUZU nibs come in fine, medium, and broad grinds, and I'll be showing you how each of them write here in just a few minutes. First, I want to point out a special feature with how this nib and feed are designed. Most fountain pens have the feed channel on top, which allows the ink to flow to the nib, while it has an air channel on the underside of the feed to allow air to exchange with the space taken up from that ink to keep a proper pressure balance as you write. So what that means is for most fountain pens, you have to submerge the nib all the way up to the grip in order to fill it, since most pens draw ink up through that air channel when filling from the bottle, and that air channel is usually right at the grip of the pen. However, Sailor thought about this, and they did something that I don't think I've ever seen before. If you look at the nib at first glance, kind of face on, it'll look like most others with a slit that goes from the tip of the nib to a breather hole. But if you look closer, the slit doesn't go all the way up to the hole. Did they mess this up? No, it's because that's actually not a breather hole, which normally would help maybe ink flow out of the pen or just be aesthetic. It's actually what they call the heart hole, or what I would call the filler hole on most other pens. This hole is where the pen actually draws up ink into the pen. So you actually only need to submerge the nib up to this hole to fill it from a bottle instead of dunking it all the way up to the grip. So this means that if you play your cards right, you can fill the pen without getting any ink on the pen at all, just a little bit on the nib that you can easily wipe off. The nib and the feed are friction fit and technically removable for ease of cleaning. It's not endorsed by Sailor for warranty reasons, so disassemble at your own risk. But I will say they seem pretty sturdy, so I don't think you're taking a too great of a risk if you do that, but that's totally your call. You'll want some kind of a grip or something to help you to be able to pull that out though. It's kind of tough to remove with just your fingers, especially for the first time. It's just friction fit inside, and while it does appear to go back in any direction, it won't actually lock down in place until you get it right in that specific orientation. So just take note of that and how far it has to be to kind of click in place if you do happen to remove it. Now, because you can take this apart if you want to, it also has that cartridge converter filling. I think this will actually be a great pen for sampling inks and maybe using some higher maintenance inks like some heavy sheeners and shimmering ink. I can see it being kind of a go-to pen for ink sampling because it fits really well inside of our sampler vials. The heart hole allows it to fill down to a pretty low volume of ink inside that vial, and that cartridge converter, filling mechanism will allow you to easily flush out the pen with a bulb syringe. Only thing you gotta do is watch out when you do the bulb syringe, because if you give it a lot of pressure, you'll actually get a jet of water that'll shoot straight out of that heart hole. So, you don't want to shoot that all over your shirt or the countertop or anything. So I recommend cleaning this pen with the nib facing down towards the sink or into a cup where it can catch all that water that might shoot out. Okay, so that's all well and good. Neat features, cool, okay. But how does this thing actually write? Because that's honestly what matters the most. Now, Sailor has a really good reputation for their gold nibs, and I think expectations are probably going to be pretty high for their steel ones. While the price point of the TUZU is significantly lower, and the nib material can certainly, make a difference in the writing feel from their more expensive pens, I can say that I'm pretty pleased with the quality of these nibs. They seem very consistent from pen to pen, and the grind on the tipping is very clean, very uniform. It's like a nice round ball. So what that means is that there's not much of a sweet spot to have to find. The very round tipping will be pretty accommodating to more writing angles than a lot of other pens might be. You write low, you write high, you're gonna get a pretty similar result. It's very forgiving. The nib has the Sailor anchor logo on its face, which looks clean, and it's fairly subtle. The nib size designation is over on the left wing, showing an F for fine, M for medium, and a B for broad. Now on the right wing, there's an H on all the nib sizes, which I think designates hard, as in it's a stiff nib and not a flexible one. Now, as far as I know, there isn't a soft nib version of this pen, so the H is somewhat superfluous, but just know that it's there and don't really think about it too much. So as I mentioned, there are 3 different nib sizes, fine, medium, and broad. And you can get these nib sizes on any of the colors offered on the TUZU. And this is kind of a nice expansion from the Compass 1911, which only came in that one nib size. Writing with all of them, I'll say that they're not really gushers. The ink flow is consistent and very controlled. If you're used to writing with more European fines, mediums, and broads, these might feel like a slightly thinner line than maybe what you see from those other brands if you're comparing, one nib size to the other across those brands. If you're generally a fan of extra fine nibs, then the fine nib is going to be the most to your liking here. It writes a line about as thick as a Lamy Safari extra fine, maybe somewhere between that and a fine. There's a bit of feedback with the fine nib. It has a little bit of grab to it as you write, similar maybe to like a graphite pencil. It's a very consistent feel in all directions. I wouldn't even say that it approaches scratchiness. Now, I tend to have a heavy hand and it feels toothier if I press hard as I usually like to. So I make a little more conscious effort to lighten up my touch with this fine nib, and I find that to be more comfortable. I think this will be a really good nib for most writers, especially if you're writing in a smaller ruling or if you have a more absorbent paper to deal with. Now, the medium nib is gonna have a proportionally broader line and smoother feel than the fine, as you might expect. It also has the slightest hint of grab on the paper. If you just don't know what nib size you might like, The medium is going to be a very solid choice on the TUZU, I think. It's a little finer than medium nibs from maybe some other intro pens that you've tried. It might be a little more similar to like the Platinum than say the Lamy. And that's okay with me, honestly, it writes really well. The broad nib is obviously going to be the broadest and smoothest of these three nibs. To me, it's still a little bit conservative for a broad. It's not a gusher. It puts down a very solid, very consistent line. And using inks with special properties, this will be the nib that will show off, you know, those properties the best out of these three pens. I think if you tend to consider broad nibs from most companies to be a bit much, this one might actually be worth trying, as it's just a little bit more reined in. Now, these nibs are quite stiff. It's definitely not a flexible nib. In fact, they're great for newbies because they can take a lot of writing pressure. They're not delicate. You can sort of abuse them a little bit and they keep on trucking. So as far as ink choices go for the TUZU, you can really put anything in these that you want because it comes with that converter. But I would maybe steer towards slightly wetter inks. Since these pens aren't really gushers to begin with, it can really kind of take anything. If you put a really dry ink in here, you'll definitely feel more of that drag on the page and the ink will look a little less saturated. It's not my personal taste, but that's fine. Now, I wouldn't shy away from using basically any ink in here, especially because you can relatively easily clean out the pen with that full disassembly and that bulb syringe if you want. I could see this being a really good ink sampling pen, especially given that heart hole filling. You know, of course, if you prefer using cartridges, Sailor has a pretty decent selection available for those, keeping in mind they are proprietary to that brand. So let's talk about the price, right? So the MSRP on the TUZU Adjust is $55, which I think is pretty fair when you look at the quality of it and the fact that it comes with that $12 converter. You'll likely see the pen price less than $55 online, and we are actually pricing it a little bit more aggressively on gouletpens.com because we really want to see a bunch of you try this pen out. So we're pricing ours at $39.50. Prices can always fluctuate, so don't hold me to this forever, but this is our plan for the time being as of mid-2024 when they launch. Now this puts the pen right alongside established staples like the Lamy Safari, TUZU Eco, Pilot Metropolitan. And these are all juggernauts in kind of the intro pen space. So I'm really eager to see how this pen is received by you all in the pen community. If you do happen to get a TUZU, please let me and my team know, either in the comments here on this video, you can leave some reviews on our site, or just reach out to us directly so that we can get your feedback on it. So that's my take on the Sailor TUZU Adjust. Now, while they've designed this pen with a lean towards new fountain pen users, I think it's something that will be worth checking out for anyone looking for a clean-looking, durable daily writer. You can get more details and up-to-date specs on the Sailor TUZU on gouletpens.com, and you can check out lots of other great pens, ink, and paper there as well. You can also subscribe to YouTube and watch more of our videos here. Thank you so much for joining me today, and write on.